All right, so now what we're going to be doing is creating this HDA. Now, later on, we will obviously be, filling it with all of the scripts, linking everything, creating all the callbacks, everything else that we need to do. But a lot of the times, especially when I know what the tool it needs to do, like in this case, I like to start by just actually building the tool, but just with a bunch of empty like menus and buttons and things, because sometimes that helps your mind. It helps you sort of imagine what the tool needs to do, and you can kind of click these buttons, and sure, maybe the button does nothing, or when you click this menu, it's got a bunch of maybe just things that you've manually placed in there just as a way to kind of almost imagine how you as a user would want the tool to function. And it, because a lot of the times when you start thinking, oh, I'm going to build a tool to do exactly this, maybe you didn't think of a cache path or a render path or whatever until you start laying it out, and then it starts to kind of make sense. So we're going to recreate this HDA. And then later start adding the scripts to it one at a time. We're going to sort of build up the functionality of the tool. So I just want to take a second to remind everyone about the 123.py, right? So I'm opening up my 123.py in PyCharm. And we have discussed this before, obviously, about what it does. So we know that 123.py runs when I open Houdini first, including obviously when I run Houdini, it opens a brand new scene. It runs 123.py and then 456. But every time we then load a scene, it runs 456 every time. But 123 only runs when I start Houdini. Now in here, if you don't have exactly this, what I have in here, then please go ahead and copy it down and make sure that this is in your 123.py. We did this earlier on in the course, where we created a sort of a global repository for our scripts, right? And we're appending that to the sys.path, right? But we also added it to our environment variables on our machines, so our scripts should already pick up even without this line. But I do like doing it this way because I feel it's really easy to come in here and just add some scripts to this. So this is kind of my preferred method, but you can do it either way. There's no harm in doing it both ways, right? So I would suggest that you do this. And then here I'm doing the same thing with the HDAs. I have my $HH, which is the default, right? We did discuss this before. And then our global repository for HDAs. So remember, these are our global HDAs, not project specific. And then I'm just adding it to our OTL scan path and reloading, okay? Because we do need to reload it every time, okay? We're going to do a similar thing when we set our project. We will add to this path a project-specific HDA path and then reload as well, okay? So that we can essentially say, well, we have access to our global HDAs, but now as we set project, we're going to scan for the things within that project only. Well, in addition to our global ones, of course. And same thing with the scripts, although with the scripts we don't have to reload, we just go sys.path.append and it will add it in, and then we can call our scripts by name and it will load them. So the same way we import a normal module, we just say import OS or import JSON. Well, now because of this, we'll be able to say import my script and it will load our script. All right. So your 123 should look like mine, except of course with different path. A path to wherever your global script repository is, and the same to your global HDA repository, but the rest should look the same. I have nothing in my 456.py. Like I said before, a lot of the times I don't really find this 456 useful because we don't really know what each scene is going to do. So, I set my global things when I open Houdini, but after that, I want direct control over what's happening in my scene. So I often don't use 456. Of course, if you have a reason, then go ahead and use it. But yeah. All right. So as long as you have that, then we should be good to go, because we're going to store this HDA in our global repository because we want it to scan. We don't want to have to go and, so create this HDA and put it in a location that Houdini defines for us, right? I don't like going and having to save my HDAs where Houdini expects me to. I want to be able to sort of structure my HDAs and my whole project data wherever I want it, create my own separate folder, which maybe automatically gets backed up, or it's structured in the way that I like it. And then Houdini must just know to go and scan that location. And that's why we set up our 1, 2, 3. Now, we're going to create a new HDA, right? So from a subnet, we'll just start with a subnet, right? I often start with a subnet. Yeah, sure, you can do something like starting with a null in this case, because really we're not wanting to do anything to it. Or you could start with anything, a geonode maybe, but I don't know. Inside of a geonode, it goes to SOP level. Inside of a subnet, it's still part of geo level. And so if you wanted SOP level, you can then go into a geonode and then to SOP level. So even though in this case we want nothing inside of here, right? We know that we want nothing. You never know what you're going to need later on. And for me, a subnet is just the most sort of the safest bet. That inside of it, I could create something on geometry level, but I could also create a geonode and go inside of it and create something at SOP level. And so maybe you need some kind of SOP node that runs based on whatever the project data is. Then we could just go and add that in nice and easily. Maybe you want to create a visualizer for your project data or something. Like some text actually in your scene that displays the project name and the scene name or the FPS or something. So you would then go inside, create a geonode with your, maybe like a font or something that's reading your project data. You can do whatever you want inside of here. If we've started at geo level, we can only go down into SOP level. Okay, so I just find subnets the best way to start. Okay. So we're going to take a subnet and we're going to publish this. So we're going to right click and say create digital asset. And then we're going to go save this where we want it to be, right? Now over here, you'll see this one I've saved in my global HDA repository, and I've called it just basically scene data, right? So I'm going to go and actually copy this just to make it easier. So we're in that path. Now, obviously, I already have one called scene data. So I don't want to create another one in that exact same thing. So I'm going to call mine scene data, let's just say class, right? So this is the one that I'm creating for the class, but there's already one created that functions. And I want to create them separate just because I want to be able to refer back to this one and show you guys what it does while we build it up. You guys can obviously just skip this and just call yours scene data, because by the end, it'll function exactly like my scene data node over here. Okay, so I'm just calling it that. And then the operator name is your actual the name. So because you have your so under here you have your sort of your label, and then your HDA file name, and those do not have to actually relate, but it is better that they do. But your label can have spaces and capital letters and things like that. So let's call this scene data, right? Oh, sorry, this is your label. Sorry, I misspoke there. This is your label. This is the actual operator name. Now the operator name, though, that is kind of when you drop it down now. So like when I drop down scene data, okay. Okay, it's already got one, so it's failing. But you'll see that it... Oh, sorry, it's failing because we created one here. Basically, when you drop it down, the name is set by the operator name, okay? It's funny, it used to actually take it from the label in older versions of Houdini, and now it takes it from the operator name. So if you want it to be capitalized or whatever, then you actually need to capitalize it here in the name, okay? But it's just sort of an old habit that I have, that I always, names should be lowercase and have underscores, and labels should then have your proper, readable cases and spaces and whatever. So I always name it like this. and then when you drop it down, it's lowercase, but we can always create an on-created script that renames it for us or something like that, okay, which is something that we will do, right? So I just want you to know how this works in case you do want to set it that it automatically has capitalized, then you can do it here. But we're going to, because it is also then going to add a 1 at the end, so I don't like that. So overall, I'm going to create an on-created script that gets rid of that and just renames it to whatever I want, okay? So we're going to call it this. Right? Although in my case now, I'm also going to append the word class to the end of this. You do not have to do that, okay? I'm only doing it so that we can tell the difference between the one that we're busy building versus the one that is already completed, okay? Now, I just want to, in fact, I should probably, okay, do you know what I'm going to do? I just want to go back there and I'm going to delete this and go and redo that because I want to actually show you, there was something else I wanted to show you, which is namespaces, okay? Just in case you don't know what how the namespacing works, it's really good to actually show you that now, right? So again, I'm going to go and paste this in that same location, but call it class. Then in here, I'm going to call it scene data underscore class, right? Here I'll call it class like that. Okay, so we're back to this point, but namespaces that you can use in operator names are basically additional bits of information that you can attach to the name of the node that kind of get read separately. So you can specifically call that scene, that the namespace, but you do not have to. For example, versioning. So we've even come across this when we were creating nodes using Python, that there was the ability, there was sort of a node name and then colon and then 2.0, right? Now you can create the node without calling 2.0. You just call the name and it's going to call the latest version automatically. But if you wanted to force it to grab an old version, then you could use the double colon and then force 1.0, and then it'll actually create the node at version 1.0. Okay, so you can put a double colon and then put your versioning. Okay, so we can say, like, 01.00. Okay, so we can sort of have our versioning in here. Okay. But there is also, you can actually attach a namespace at the beginning. So for example, we could specifically maybe attach Rebelway at the beginning there. So this is kind of like, these are all of our tools that are created under this sort of project, or for a particular company or for a particular client or something like that. You could attach this namespace here. And so maybe you have multiple scene data nodes, then you could use this namespace as a way to call that specific one, but you also don't have to. You can just call scene data class and it will grab that node, but it's kind of embedded with this additional information, okay? So this is kind of how it works. In fact, as far as I know, there is even one more layer, which I'm not really sure the purpose of this. I think, but there is something else that you could sort of have. So you can have one bit of information, then the kind of the parent or the project or the company or something like that, and then it's your actual node name, and then it's your version. Okay, so it's kind of like a hierarchy of data separated by these double colons, right? I've never needed to use more than just this, and this is only for when you're at a company and they want specifically for it to be tagged with their nodes, so that they know if you ship that node, use it at another place, maybe external, like outsource companies or whatever, that they are not taking your nodes and then using it somewhere else. Right, so that's what this is for. If you want to, you can do it. So you could attach maybe Rebelway there or something, or your own company name or whatever, and then you can go and put a version, because then when we create versions for this, we can, so I'm going to save it like this, right? And I'll show you. You see our HDA is still called scene data like that. We still have the normal name over here, so it's all totally fine, but the operator type has Rebelway scene data class, and then 1.0. Okay, obviously yours just wouldn't have the word class. Okay, and when we middle click, we see that there as well. And if I right click and now go to show in Asset Manager, you'll see here we can see the version. And let's go back here. If you go under configuration and then under asset bar, you say display menu of all definitions. By default, it's set to hide asset bar. Okay, this will be the default if you haven't set this already. But if you click this, then above in your parameters, when you have an HDA selected, it will show you this drop-down list over here. Okay. So scene data class still exists in the scene, but it exists as a dummy because I already deleted it, but it kind of doesn't like you to delete things that are in the scene. So it creates a dummy definition. When I restart this, this will disappear, but I will be left with this one, right? Now, and then it is obviously the list of the actual HDAs, because you could have different, you could have these linked, so you could create another scene data HDA, but in a different HDA file. And so there would be a list of HDA files here as well. And then when we version this up, okay, we would come here and right click and kind of say duplicate, right? And then it's going to create a whole new one, and we could even store it in the same HDA file, but we would just say we would create maybe 2.0, okay? And so now we have these two different versions. So you've essentially versioned up, right? And when that happens, it doesn't automatically version up here, but you can just go and select your version over here, right? And so we've moved to version 2.0, or here we can move to version 1. And obviously anything we do to version 1, like now, will not carry over into 2.0, okay? So just in case, because a lot of people don't kind of know how this works, so I just wanted to point it out. All right, so we'll just leave it like this. We'll just keep working on version 2.0, because if I drop one down now automatically, right? So I drop down scene data. Right now, like I said, there is, this is the one that I've already created. These two exist only because one of them is the actual dummy definition. Now, unfortunately, you can't, just from this name, you can't tell which one is the dummy and which one is not, okay? So you have to just drop one down. But when I, if I reload in the scene, then that one will disappear, okay? And in fact, because I don't have one down in my scene, I should be able to go under here and find the dummy, right? So current hip file, embedded scene data class. So you see here, it's embedded that. I can now delete it because I don't have one in my scene. The reason I created that one is because when I deleted the HDA, I had a copy of the instance in my actual scene, and it knows that that will cause a crash. So it creates a dummy definition. But now you'll see that that is gone from this list. And when I say scene data, there will only be two. Our original one and then the new one that we've created, which is class. And when we drop this down, it will drop down as 2.0. Even if this one is specifically set to 1.0, when I drop, it will always drop the latest version unless I specify otherwise. Okay, so this is a way of managing your versions. Okay, so we're going to set this to 2.0, and then we're going to work on this one. Okay. Oh, in fact, I'm going to drop one down because then it'll come with its name as well. Oh, whoops, sorry. Scene data class. Okay, there we are. Okay, so let's start by looking at the actual parameters that we want to get across, right? So as I said before, there are a lot of callbacks and all sorts of crazy things happening here, and we've got all of our scripts and stuff, so but we're not going to worry about that for now. What we're trying to do is create this sort of functionality, right? We want to almost be able to play with this, but the buttons do nothing, but to just get a sense of what it is that we're trying to build. Okay, so we'll look on the top level here, right? So we've got a folder for our settings at the top, and then we've got a folder for our variables. Okay, so this is what we as the user are setting, and then this is what is essentially spit out by the script. Okay, and we have a string menu. We then have two buttons. We then have another string menu which has its own drop-down menu. Now this is just a replace menu, but this one allows us to type because we can type a new one in and then it'll add it automatically for us. Okay, so you could do both of these in this top method, or you could do them both in this bottom method, or as I've done, one and the other, because I found this to make the most sense. All right, so we're going to go and create. Now our transform and subnet are not really necessary, so we can't delete them though because they have things that are necessary, but we just make them invisible. Okay, so we can just select them or both and say invisible, right? So we're now going to be getting rid of everything on the top level here, and then I'm going to create a new folder and call this settings, right? And you'll see one of my favorites. I love using the simple tabs like these, just with a name and then it's in a nice little square. To me, that's nice and neat. You can put tabs if you want, but for me with the tabs you have to like click through them. I don't know, I just prefer this, right? And then we're going to go and create a string over here, right? And we'll call it, let's try and call it the exact same that we have on this. So the name is proj, okay, because this is for our project parameter, so we're just going to call it proj and project. Okay, and then obviously on here it has a menu, right? But the menu is going to be a menu script, which is referencing our script in here, our Python script, right? So for now we can just go and enter just maybe some empty strings and, you know, test project, okay, and, you know, create a little menu, and we can select the type, because remember now if we apply this and I select here, our type is this. Okay, so by default it is going to be the kind of normal replace type, which is actually what we want, so that's great. Okay, so let's see what's next. So we've got that, then we've obviously got our two buttons as well, right? So we can go in here, create two buttons, right? So one of these now, let's hover over and we'll see what it's called. So that's called add proj and that's called remove proj. Okay, obviously you can call yours different names to what I've got mine as, but later when we're referring to scripts, if you've named yours differently, then you might get a bit confused, because I'm calling, you know, I might refer to that parameter, and the parameter on mine is called add proj, but if yours is called something different, you need to remember that every single time you call it. So I would recommend that you do just match mine, but if you do happen to name yours something different, then just go ahead and remember to every time we refer to it that it's called something different. So remove proj, and I've got, see the label is a plus and a minus here, right? Now when I click apply, obviously this is not going to quite be what we want. We then want to obviously then have our project say horizontally join to next parameter, and our add proj to also join to the next parameter, right? So it'll go there. Okay, now something I've done in here, so you'll see I've created a label. So this is just a bit of a hack, because I wanted my plus and minus to be off to the right hand side. Okay, just a little bit of a hack. I created a label with an empty label, you know, so I'm not actually displaying the label. I've got a column, but there's nothing inside of that column, and then I'm also horizontally joining it, and that's just a way of forcing there to be a gap. Okay, yeah, it's just one of those hacky things that you can kind of do. So there we go, so that's still joined. So now when I click apply, there we are, looks how we expect it to look. And there's our menu as well. Okay, and then we have our scene data, sorry, our scene, which is called scene, and the label is scene with a capital S. So let's create another string, scene and scene, and then this does also have a menu, and again it will be a Python script menu, but for now let's just create some, you know, test scene. Okay, so just some data in there, and we but the menu type is not the normal type, so we don't want it like this. We just wanted something where we can also type in there, so we can do a replace field. Okay, so this allows us that when we select that, it's going to replace this, but we can also still type in here. Okay, and we do not want to do the toggle, because then that's going to, when we have something typed, when we click this, it will then it'll toggle sort of on and off. I guess I have to click apply for that to happen, right? So that's going to add it and subtract it, which is not what we want. Okay, so we want to replace. So there we are. Now, like I said before, we're just recreating this HTA, and we normally don't have that. But what we're doing is actually we're using our imaginations and saying, okay, well, hang on, what would I want to do as a user? Well, I want to have a drop-down list, select a project, or be able to add and remove projects, and then enter a scene number. So I go, oh, this is the the intro scene, and then I'll create that as a scene, and that'll be available in this list. Okay, so use the power of imagination. Right, so now we have our variables, so I'm going to keep that inside of a folder. Right, now obviously everyone's different, but I tend to be very OCD about things, so I always have like subfolders within folders and whatever. Like I store things very hierarchical, so even though that's totally almost seems redundant, I like to have a variables and then project and scene, because I feel like that tells the user what this actually is. Okay, so we're going to create project and scene. Okay, and then I'm going to set all of those to be simple, okay, because I like how that looks. And then under project, we just, well, in fact, under both, we just have a long list of strings, okay, but some of them are just normal strings, others are actually project paths, paths. Okay, so you'll see here it's normal strings, and then these ones are file directories, like they're pointing on disk, and that's just those are still string types. Remember when we created them? It's just that the actual the subtype of string is that it's a file path, and that's because then it gives us these extra menus of paths that we've already explored before, as well as the ability to click on it and it takes us to that path. Okay, and because of that, we're talking about actual paths on our computer, it's easier to have that there. So we're going to just go ahead and create all of those. Okay, so pop down a string, right, and we'll say, so the first one is called proj_var. Okay, proj_var, and it's called, now I'm calling mine $project because I want to be able to sort of, like I said, it's a way of telling the user that this is a variable. We're used to seeing the $sign, so $project like this is kind of saying, hey, I've set this variable, so now you can use $project and it will call whatever is in here. Okay, so we're going to go and create that. Let's just select this and see all the others. So there's project, there's code var, right? So code, and var is obviously for variable, so it's the code variable, but it's $code, right? Then we also have FPS, and that is proj FPS. Okay, and the reason I did it as proj FPS is because there is already an FPS variable, and we don't want to overwrite that, because the FPS is what the current FPS is. But the project FPS is reading specifically from the data that we set for the project, saying this project should be 30 FPS. I don't care what the current FPS is. The project says it should be 30, and so I want to refer to what it says it should be. Okay. Now I've just put a space in here just to separate the kind of the main variables that we've gone and set versus the ones that are intrinsically set by the script. So I'm going to go and create a separator. Then I'm creating a bunch of file paths over here. So file directory. Okay. The one is called proj_path. Okay, and let's $project path. Then we create another one, which is scenes path. Okay, and it's scenes plural, because obviously that is the path where all of the scenes are stored, not where the one current scene is. So $scene, this is our actual current scene, but where all of the scenes are stored is here. Okay, so scenes path. And I know it's pedantic, but we need to be very careful of stuff like that, because later on we're referring to all of this through code. So the 1s can mean the difference between us sitting there for hours screaming at the computer going, why is this not working? And believe me, that will happen. It's an occupational hazard of doing coding. Okay, so then scripts path, and it's $scripts path. Okay, so there we should have recreated all of those. Okay, so they look exactly the same. And then in scene, we're just going to also create a string called scene var, and we'll call it $scene. And then we've got a separator, and then directory. So it's save path, okay, save path, $save path. Normally I like to name my variables like this, where they have the same name as as the parameter, so that when we're referring to the name versus the actual variable name, it totally makes sense. So wait, hang on here, we're calling it output path, yeah, see, so that we can kind of tell. We should be able to, it should essentially be intuitive. When you look at it, you should assume that you know what the path is. I'm just double checking so that we don't make any mistakes here, but really we can kind of assume here that a cache path, well, $cache path, the name is probably cache path, just makes sense. Okay, and the only thing you need to be careful of is when you're setting variables is that does that variable already exist? So I've gone ahead obviously with all of these and double checked that they do not already exist. Okay, now you can go ahead and create your own if you want. You can add to this list, right? So you see here we've entirely recreated that node, except that it obviously doesn't function at all. Okay, so we're going to go and have it that when it drops down, it sets the comment, it sets the color, sets the shape, changes the name, sets the display and selectability flag. We're going to go and put in our callback scripts, our Python module. We're going to sort of build the content into this node, but this is a node that is functionable. And I know, like I say, here we're just rebuilding one that already does exist, but when I built this the very first time, okay, in preparation for this course, I literally sat down and the very first thing I did was built this node, kind of like what we've just done. Of course, there were certain paths that I hadn't thought of that I would need, so I had a lot fewer of them. I had like project path and scenes path, but I didn't think about the HDAs and scripts until a bit later. Early on, I had just an output path and I hadn't split it up into cache and render path. So, and I hadn't created the plus and minus yet for the project. I just kind of assumed I'd have a list of projects, and then later on I thought, oh, do you know what I need is the ability to actually add and remove projects instead of just a list that already exists. So yes, of course, you will go back and add features later on, but it's still an important part of it to sit down and actually create the kind of the empty buttons, essentially. It's kind of like, designing a car. You almost need to think about the user, like the driver, how comfortable it is to sit, where the buttons are, where the steering wheel is, make sure that it works for the person who's going to actually buy it, and then around that you create the engine and everything, and make sure that doesn't, because you can't just sell a car saying, oh well, unfortunately you kind of have to sit on top of the car and get hit by wind and rain because we built this awesome amazing engine inside and it takes up all the space. Nobody's going to buy that car, right? So what we're doing here is we're essentially designing from the user's point backwards. Okay, so there we are. I hope that you have this functioning, I will provide you guys with this HDA if you want as well, but it is better for you to actually go through the process of creating this yourself. You need to get used to creating all of this, make sure that it works, because you will make some mistakes along the way and then you'll learn from them. Okay, so I'll see you all in the next lesson.